Hi, I'm Peter from Mount Vision Campaign Equestrian. I'm about to show you some pictures of a stallion, a thoroughbred stallion that decided to make a bit of a snack of my back, and after that just show you a couple of shots of the injury that he did. After that, we'll have a little bit of a chat about why thoroughbred stallions seem to have this tendency, shall we say, to take pieces out of people. We'll also have a little chat about what's worse, their teeth or their feet, when it comes to being attacked by a horse. Anyway, have a look at the horse, handsome fellow that he is, and also have a look at those injuries to my back, and then, as I say, we'll have a little bit of a chat about why thoroughbred stallions in particular seem to be predisposed to this kind of behaviour. Hope you get something out of this. Generally speaking, I would suggest it's probably the feet worse, whether it's front feet or back feet. But really, when it comes down to it, when you're talking about being savaged by a horse, whether it's teeth or being kicked or front-footed or struck, it's really a bit like what my old man used to say to me. If he thought I was getting a little bit out of order, he'd say, which one do you want, hospital or cemetery? And it's a bit like that with horses as well, particularly stallions. The hospital would be the teeth, and the cemetery would be the feet. So anyway, I got the hospital. I didn't get the cemetery, which is better than it could have been. Hello, and good to see you back again. You will have seen some pictures of the stallion in question, the thoroughbred stallion that had a chew on my back, and you will have seen some of the a couple of photos of the damage that he did there a few days after it actually took place. We said before you had a look at those that would have a little bit of a chat about why thoroughbred stallions in particular seem predisposed to this kind of behaviour. The first question, of course, is, are they predisposed to this kind of behaviour? Is it uniquely a thoroughbred kind of behaviour? Well, in my experience, I have to say yes, probably it is. I've worked with a number of stallions, and it does tend to be thoroughbreds that cause the biggest difficulties in this kind of area. I've got friends who have been bitten, lifted off the ground like I was in this incident, dropped on the ground and then struck with front feet. I've had another friend who lost the end of his finger to a stallion, and another colleague who was attacked, I think 3, possibly 4 times by the same stallion. And these kind of attacks, these kind of events seem to occur out of the blue, no apparent cause that can be easily identified. They are what we might describe as random acts of violence. Certainly in the incident that I had the other day, had gone through a very straightforward routine with the horse, one he was familiar with. There was nothing out of the ordinary. I reached down to pick up his foot, to pick out his hoof, his near fore, which means obviously I was right on the shoulder, which is meant to be the safest place to be on a horse, and this probably just demonstrates that even the safest place isn't necessarily totally secure. It certainly wasn't in this instance. What set him off? Simply have no idea. But I think we can suggest some reasons why thoroughbreds in particular seem predisposed to this kind of behaviour. And it doesn't start with them as breeding stallions. I think the whole life up to being selected to stand at stud contribute to their behaviour. If we think about the life of a thoroughbred stallion or any thoroughbred racehorse, they're born, they're weaned, they run with the mares when they're young. After weaning, they're separated out from the mares, and generally they run together in mobs of colts. At that stage, I've done a lot of work with them and never had a problem with them. They spend time in the paddock as mobs, typically around up to 10, and they run around, they play fight, chase each other. You go and you feed them. They are boisterous, but they're not really dangerous as such if you know what you're doing. After they're weaned and up until the age of yearling, that's their life, and it's a fairly normal one. The young life with the mares in a herd, and then as bachelor colts, that's also fairly normal. In the wild, bachelor colts band together until such a time as they can secure themselves a mob of mares. It's at the yearling stage that things start to change for colts. They're brought in, selected for yearling prep, perhaps for the sales. Then at that stage they're separated out from their companions and from other horses. They're given a yard of their own, and at that point they start a life of solitary existence. They live in a small paddock on their own. They come in, they're groomed, they spend the night in a box, and that becomes their life pretty much until they're sold. And then when they're sold, they go to a racing stable, and the same process continues, where they can spend an enormous part of the day isolated in boxes when they're in work, and tend to be isolated in individual paddocks when they're being spelled, being colts and not been gelded. And that, I think, begins the root of the problem. They are not properly socialised by other horses from a very early age. They become very familiar with human beings, and familiarity can breed contempt, and then they can become violent or aggressive. In the racing industry, the level of behaviour required of a horse is comparatively low. So young horses can get away with quite a lot. They really have only one function, and that is to run well. And in the racing industry, I've seen people put up with an awful lot from young horses simply because it hasn't been necessary. It's not necessary to train them and discipline them in the same way as you would, say, a sport horse. So then what happens? He's a good horse. He's still entire. He wins some races. He's got the quality breeding to be a good stud, to perhaps be a good breeding stallion, and so he goes into a breeding program. Does his life change? Not really. In fact, it probably gets less interesting. He no longer goes out to races. He no longer has that stimulation of training. Instead, he is standing in a paddock or in a box for 80% of the year, and then for 20% of the year he is taken from one of those places, led into where a mare is, covers the mare, and is led back out again, and that becomes his life. This isn't happening to old horses either. This isn't like a geriatric. I mean, a racehorse career can be over by the time he's 5, and if he's a quality stallion, then he can be standing at start at 5. He's won some good races, won some good money, and at 5 he's only just reached, or just reaching, adulthood. So this barely out of his adolescence horse is now breeding, and he's now covering mares, and with that his hormones are given an extra pump. It is common for horses that are covering mares to get a little more energetic, shall we say. That's normal. Their hormones are at work. But what we have with thoroughbred stallions is a pumping up of their hormones with young, as I say, young adult horses that are poorly disciplined, both in terms of their human activity, but also poorly disciplined in the fact that they haven't been managed by other horses in a herd or in a mob. So they're poorly socialised and poorly handled, and then they're expected to perform. That gets their hormones going, and with the increase in testosterone, so there becomes an inevitable increase in aggression. Finds an outlet. If they're not covering a lot of mares, there's a lot of energy there, and that aggression has to go somewhere. Typically, if it's going to happen, if the horse is inclined that way, it'll take a chunk out of a handler. Simple as that. It's quite common. I mean, I know one horse where they couldn't go into his paddock without being padded up. I know another stallion where when it came to covering mares, they fed him down the chute. No one was trying to handle him or hold the mare. He covered the mare, and then to get him to go back up his chute, they turned a fire hose on him. There are always ways and means, but the primary cause of the issues, I think, is the lack of socialisation. And we can say that, I think, because we can compare how thoroughbred stallions behave with the way that other stallions behave. Even on a horse stud, there are other stallions. There are the teaser stallions. Teaser stallions, like their bigger thoroughbred cousins, are kept in separate yards, just like they are, but the key difference is they are always kept close to other horses. The teaser stallion's job is to tease the mares, to bring them into season, and to check that they are in season prior to the breeding stallion coming to cover the mare. So they're always in contact with mares, always through a gate, or through a fence, but they have that contact. They have the mares coming over to them on their side of the fence, there's a lot of horse interaction there between the horses. And teaser stallions have always been, in my experience, some of the loveliest horses to work with. Easy to work with. There's also stallions of other breeds where they've been well and properly socialised and they just don't present a difficulty. This is not to say that a horse can't be aggressive. Any horse can be aggressive, but stallions are not necessarily aggressive, and not all stallions need to be aggressive. I suppose, if you think about it, and the way that thoroughbreds are socialised and handled, it's not so surprising that there are a few rogue ones that do try to make a meal of people. It's probably more surprising that more of them don't. Very few of the number that stand do that, but it is a significant minority. So, how do we handle a stallion that tends to take a piece of somebody? Well, we tend to get protective of ourselves. And what that tends to mean is, well, we put on body armour, we isolate the problem, and reduce probably the social interaction that horse is going to have. So we're pretty good at treating symptoms rather than causes. Can we treat the cause, given that a horse gets to 5 years old, has not been properly socialised with other horses, and perhaps not properly disciplined as a horse in the company of human beings? Probably. But the question is, who's going to see it as being of worthwhile value, and what's the return on investment? Stallion handlers are used to dodging teeth. I can't see anyone putting their precious thoroughbred in with some other entire thoroughbred colts either, because, well, they will play, and when boys play, somebody always gets hurt. So we don't want that. But, a gelding, an older gelding that is bigger perhaps, is always a good idea, because although he's a gelding, he's not a threat to the stallion. As a gelding, he's not going to get pregnant to the stallion, but if he's a bigger, stronger gelding, then he won't put up with nonsense from a young colt either. In fact, I have here a big warm blood gelding in with a young warm blood colt, and it works extremely well. Both of them are well behaved, both of them discipline each other one way or another. The process of socialisation, I don't think, can be underestimated in terms of its value, particularly with herd animals, social animals like horses. I think the worst thing we can do with social animals like horses is what we do to young colts in the racing industry, which is to isolate them, separate them out, and then expect good behaviour.